for curating this show of watercolors, photography, acrylics, oil, and charcoal for us. Also, everyone is invited to join us after the service on the pavilion for coffee and conversation. If you are new to us, please look for the visitor's welcome table on the pavilion. Visitors are encouraged to visit the table and ask any questions from a member of the membership committee, and to try to get to know more of us and recent visitors as well. We look forward to meeting you. If you would like to discuss this service today with Tom after the service, he will be sitting at the speaker's table. So look for him, say hi, and maybe he'll have answers to some of your ideas and questions. To find out more about these and other opportunities for fellowship and for learning, check out our weekly news email blasts. If you would like to get on the list, please contact office@uunaples.org. Now, we need to take a deep breath. Let's settle ourselves into this time of worship with this morning's prelude.
We gather this morning in pride for our country and concern for its future. We acknowledge our nation's founders, their courage, patriotism, and sacrifice. We thank those who have fought and died for this country out of necessity, but sometimes in vain. We welcome you who have joined us this morning, either here in person or through an electronic device. We also bid welcome to those of you seeking a new faith, new opportunities, or expanded community service. We are an open-minded congregation guarding the worth and dignity of all those who gather with us and subscribe to our values. We begin each Sunday service with the lighting of this chalice. The burning chalice is the only physical symbol of our Unitarian Universalist Association and its 1,000 congregations. It appears here on the front of our lectern, on our hymnals, and on much of our literature. Light is basic to life and religion. The book of Genesis begins with a verse, "Let there be light," and there was light. Let the wick about to burn in this chalice light the path in our continual search for truth, understanding, and enlightenment as we meet here together. And we'll recite together the chalice response by Abraham Lincoln. Our reliance is in our love for liberty. Our defense is in the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all people in all lands, everywhere. Our opening hymn is in the gray hymnal number 121, "We'll Build a Land." Words are on the screen.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, and then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come, build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we see. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
My late friend and one of the founders of this congregation, Bruce Richardson, Esquire, used to say that we come to this service not to be with God, but to be with one another. We feel free to share our personal joys as well as our inevitable hardships and tragedies. We now remember those in our lives or serving the community who bring us joy and deserve our recognition, or who may be ill, challenged, departed, or grieving. We also wish comfort and peace upon the many families of gun violence and the oppressed people of Ukraine. As I reach my hand across the room, please speak aloud from your right to left, first your joys, and then on the second sweep, your sorrows, your joys. And now your sorrows. Thank you. The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. The land was ours before we were the land's. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia. But we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by, possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak until we found out that it was ourselves. We were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright to the land, vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she would become. We will now observe a minute of silence to contemplate those words.
my eye. The old oaks raise their boughs on high. Violets greeting seem, ah, 'tis a dream, ah, 'tis a dream. And when in distant lands I roam, my heart will wander to my home, while these fancies teem. Still let me dream, still let me dream.
Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. 1 if by land, and 2 if by sea. And I on the opposite shore will be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm." Then he said, "Good night," and with muffled ear silently rowed to the Charlestown shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he heard the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed the tower of the old North Church by the wooden stairs with stealthy tread to the bulky chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. By the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest windows in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath, in the churchyard, lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear, like a sentinel's tread, the watchful night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly, all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side. Now he gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth, but mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing, a spark stroke out by a steed flying fearlessly and fleet. That was all. And yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night, and the spark struck out by the steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic, meeting the ocean's tides, and under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises as the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows, black and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadow brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be the first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball, behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. This is a time when we ask for your financial support by way of the traditional offering. The offering is a necessary element of our free church. It is supported by the voluntary generosity of all who join with us. The offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation for our shared hopes and values. If you have joined us online today, please consider sending your contribution to the address which you see on the screen.
Woody Guthrie wrote, "This land is your land," after traveling for many years throughout the parts of the country that were most affected by the Great Depression. During that time, he found himself haunted by the famous Kate Smith recording of Irving Berlin's God Bless America, finding it incredibly out of touch with the nation's vast inequalities. Early versions of Guthrie's song, which he originally saw as a response to God Bless America, had a more sarcastic tone. But eventually he focused on the country's natural beauty, but ended with 2 verses that criticized the country for how it was treating its poor. Those 2 verses wound up not being included in the iconic 1951 recording of the song, possibly because of the Red Scare. Those versions only existed in the unreleased original recording he made in 1944 and were lost until that recording was rediscovered in the 1990s, after which time they became reattached to the song, changing its tenor to that of a protest song. We've included these 2 verses today. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I've roamed and rambled, I've followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, and all around me a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. When the sun came shining and I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds rolling, as the fog was lifting, a voice was chanting. This land was made for you and me. There was a big high wall there that tried to stop me. The sign was painted, it said private property, but on the backside it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. One sunny morning, in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me? Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking that freedom highway. Nobody living can ever make me turn back. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me. And please remain seated as we join in singing both verses of hymn 159, This Is My Song. This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlit beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and color, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, the God of all the nations, a song of
Tomorrow marks the 246th anniversary of these United States of America. That date saw the adoption of the Declaration of Independence by the Second Continental Congress sitting in Philadelphia. Some Americans believe that our country began on that date, that it suddenly tore itself away from Great Britain, the mother nation. Others believe that it merely marked the beginning of the long war of revolution that ended in an unlikely victory with the Treaty of Paris more than 7 bloody years later. Thomas Jefferson's memorably worded declaration is often referred to as America's birth certificate, and by some Christian evangelicals as its baptism certificate. It was not signed until 3 weeks later, and it is not the document that created our new and independent country. That resolution was drafted by another Virginia delegate, Richard Henry Lee, who submitted it to the Second Continental Congress a month earlier, June the 7th. Lee's simple document of only 80 words was then discussed in secrecy for 3 weeks because it was clearly an act of treason against King George III. It reads, 1, that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. 2, that it is expedient forthwith to take the most effective measures for forming foreign alliances. 3, that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation. That resolution was finally brought to a vote on July 2, 1776. It was a hot and humid afternoon in Center City, Philadelphia, much like today in Naples. And of course, there was no air conditioning in Independence Hall, then known as the Pennsylvania State House. A line of thunderstorms was sweeping the city, but the delegates had closed all the doors and windows to maintain secrecy. On motion of Secretary Charles Thompson, Congress President John Hancock took the Congress into a committee of the whole to vote on the Lee resolution. The delegates decided that each of the 13 colonies would vote as a unit rather than as individual delegates. The polling was done in oppressive silence, except for frequent flashes of lightning and resulting roars of thunder. In alphabetical order, each colony announced its vote. Ben Franklin's 70-year-old eyes sparkled as he announced the yes vote for his closely divided Pennsylvania delegation. The vote was 12-4 and none opposed, with New York abstaining. Exactly 246 years ago yesterday, those courageous men sitting in that sweaty hall slammed the door on their king, and there was no way for him to pass through it again, and those delegates could not back out. Under the governing law, they had committed high treason. Though they were called patriots, they were really revolutionaries. John Adams declared it was a great day in history for freedom, but it was also a dangerous day in which every delegate felt as if he may have placed his head in a British noose. John Hancock warned, "Gentlemen, we must all hang together," to which Franklin quickly retorted, "If we do not, we will all hang separately." As the rain abated and the delegates left the hall that evening, most adjourned to nearby pubs and taverns for drinks and dinner. 33-year-old Tom Jefferson, less than half Franklin's age, retired alone to contemplate the great and awful deed of the day and to revise the final draft of the Declaration written earlier with Adams and Franklin, so as to include most of the July 2 Lee resolution in his final paragraph to be approved 2 days later. These courageous men, most in their 30s and 40s, farmers, merchants, and professionals, had altered the history of the world in that one afternoon. In doing so, they had marked themselves as flaming rebels who had scorched the earth between them and the lawful government of Great Britain. They had proclaimed themselves free, as if that were the end of the game, instead of its perilous beginning. None of them had yet an opportunity to read General George Washington's reconnaissance dispatch from that very morning, stating that his spies had counted over 140 British warships arriving in lower New York Bay. In fact, there were 480, the largest armed fleet ever assembled in world history. The American War of Independence did not begin on July 2, nor on July 4, nor on August 2, when the Declaration was finally signed. It had really begun with the Boston Massacre 6 years earlier, and the Boston Tea Party of 1773, and the battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775. The Revolutionary War did not end as it should have in October 1781 with the Patriots' siege of Yorktown near Williamsburg, when General Cornwallis surrendered to both Washington and our essential French allies. It finally ended with the Treaty of Paris 2 years after that, more than 7 years after the Declaration of Independence, 8.5 years after that famous ride of Paul Revere to warn that the Redcoats were on an early morning march towards Lexington Green. Indeed, the birth of our nation involved a protracted, costly, and bloody labor that nearly resulted in a stillbirth. I noted in my introduction that some evangelicals argue that the wording of the Declaration of Independence is evidence that the founders intended this to be a Christian nation rather than a secular one. There are 4 references to the deity in that document. There are 21 references to King George, hardly evidence that the new nation was intended to be a monarchy. Even more important, the Constitution, the document underlying all our laws and system of government, makes no reference to a deity, and in its First Amendment makes it clear that government and religion may not interfere with one another. The Declaration does not refer to the Bible or any other religious tract. The committee that drafted it, Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin, were clearly not men of the Bible. Jefferson, the principal draftsman, once wrote that the New Testament was written by ignorant, unlettered men, and that it consisted of so much absurdity, untruth, charlatanism, and imposture that it should be characterized as dung, his word. His opinion of the Old Testament was one of a vengeful God that he deplored, and his draconian laws he rejected. As a humanist, and late in life a self-declared Unitarian, Jefferson rejected the supernatural and described the concept of the Trinity as insane. Jefferson was neither a man of the Bible nor a man of Christian faith, but a man of science and reason. He repeatedly rejected the Christian belief that all people were born with original sin, and he rejected the notion that God has chosen certain nations or people for favorable treatment. John Adams and his son John Quincy were birthright and lifelong Unitarians. John Adams, while president, signed a treaty declaring the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. The last thing Jefferson, Adams, or Franklin intended was a government built on a Judeo-Christian foundation. Ben Franklin wrote in his autobiography, "In short, I soon became a thorough deist, rejecting the Christianity of his father." The deists of the founding era held that belief in God did not require nor even permit a leap of faith. 10 years after the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson persuaded the Virginia House of Burgesses and General Assembly to adopt the Virginia Declaration of Religious Freedom. He was so proud of it that he had the accomplishment carved into his tombstone, along with references to the Declaration of Independence and his founding of the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Beginning with the ratification process in 1788, evangelicals attacked the language of the Constitution for its failure to acknowledge the sovereignty of God in Christ. In 1863, at the height of the Civil War, a coalition of 11 Protestant denominations attempted to secure an amendment to the Constitution that would declare the nation's allegiance to Jesus Christ and its acceptance of the Christian religion. As late as 1951, Vermont Senator Ralph Flanders introduced an amendment that read, "This nation devoutly recognizes the authority and law of Jesus Christ, Savior and ruler of nations, through whom are bestowed all blessings of Almighty God." The Christian nationalists are on the move again, and we must be eternally vigilant in guarding that wall Jefferson described as separating church and state. As an example, just look at the current Florida government schemes to siphon off public school money for parochial schools and sectarian charter schools. Just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court erased any hope we could continue to avoid Florida's direct funding of parochial and religious charter schools. They invalidated a Maine law preventing that state from refusing to fund sectarian schools that accept students residing too far for travel to their assigned public schools. In doing so, they also invalidated a 19th century provision in our own Florida Constitution that bans direct public funding of religious schools. That same week, the Supremes, by a vote of 6-3, further eroded Jefferson's First Amendment wall of religious separation and the 14th Amendment right to privacy by repealing the half-century-old Roe v. Wade abortion choice. In a concurring opinion, one justice, you know who he is, invited future reconsideration of the court's decisions upholding contraception and same-sex marriage. He did not mention overturning their anti-miscegenation decision in Loving versus Virginia, perhaps because that would invalidate his own marriage. Notice the hypocrisy of the court, declaring in the same week that New York may not place limits on dangerous firearms, but that Mississippi may limit a woman's reproductive health. The High Court has unleashed a jurisprudential civil war, further dividing the red states from the blue. This frightening, regressive movement we are witnessing must awaken us to the plain fact that our democratic republic and many of the freedoms it provides are in serious peril. On September 17, 1787, a happy Ben Franklin left Independence Hall after having mediated many delicate compromises that led to the signing that day of the proposed new Constitution. Leaving the building, he was confronted by a prominent lady who asked, "Dr. Franklin, congratulations, but what have we got, a monarchy or a republic?" His oft-quoted reply was, "A republic if you can keep it." The many disturbing national political events of the past 5 years and judicial decisions of the past month must impel us to respond to Franklin's admonition. Can we keep our democratic republic, or are we destined for more regional and interstate strife, even another civil war? Is it disappearing with constant and increasing partisanship, erosion of rights, gerrymandering, and perversion of the sacred electoral process? We've always dealt with political strife and influence peddling, but today's pay-to-play corruption leads to the sad conclusion now that we now have the best government money can buy. The costliest examples of that are the hundreds of lobbyists employed regularly by the defense and pharmaceutical industries. Big Pharma retains over 800 lobbyists, more than one for every congressman and senator. It is finally time for us to shout out, "Stop this," and to demand that our elected representatives put the people and the country before their parties and power. Franklin lived 14 years beyond the Declaration, more than half of which were spent in Paris extracting supplies and money from the French monarchy in order to defeat the common enemy. He reveled that he lived to see the ratification and implementation of the Constitution he fought to adopt. He died at my age in 1790. If we listen closely beside his easily accessible gravesite in Center City, Philadelphia, we can hear the rumble of those old bones spinning inside the coffin. His warning that we are again in real danger of losing what Ben and our brave founders created. We must pledge to do all that is required to restore his immortal peace and the true essence of our republic. Many years later, Adams and Jefferson both died on the same day, July 4, 1826, as the nation they had liberated, founded, and defined was celebrating its 50th anniversary. How's that for timing? Let us also celebrate their lives and perseverance as we celebrate our own independence tomorrow. Please rise and join in singing the rousing words of the refrain from George M. Cohan's "You're a Grand Old Flag."
You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true neath the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true neath the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast nor brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag.
Closing words are from the great American poet Langston Hughes. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. Let America be the dream that dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme that any man be crushed by one above. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. Go now in peace, in fellowship, and in celebration of our independence, and patience in the parking lot. Stand by for John Philip Sousa's Stars and Stripes Forever.
People can register to vote on the patio.
There's a table on the patio where you can register to vote and fix all this stuff.